Hello, and welcome to our course, English 170. I'm Dr. MHohner, and I'll be your professor for the course. I'm really excited to get started and do this course with you. I've picked out some readings that I think will be really interesting. I think they'll stimulate our thinking and we'll have some pretty productive conversations. If you enjoy these readings anywhere near as much as I do, then you'll have a good experience in this course. So really looking forward to discussing them with you. You might be wondering a little bit about the title of this first lesson. What do we do with our suffering? Might seem like an interesting title, but kind of a strange one for the very first lesson. So I'll talk more about this in part 2 of our first lecture. But the basic question most people have with this course is why literature? Why study literature? And my response to that is literature, the way it depicts human nature and works through human problems, can help us answer the biggest, most important questions human beings grapple with. And so with 8 lectures in this class, my goal is to pose 8 questions that, in my experience, are the questions that are most challenging, most difficult, but most important to human people, and then see how various literary texts grapple with those questions and try to answer them, so that you really see how productive reading, thinking about, writing about literature can be. And I think one of the most basic human problems, most complex but also most fundamental, is suffering. Suffering is inevitable, but why do we suffer? What do we do with our suffering? And so as challenging as that topic is, I think it's a great place to start. And there's a concept called catharsis from ancient Greece that I think will be really useful to us. And so that's going to be somewhat of a theme for the course, but it really engages with suffering, which, as I said, I think suffering is challenging as it is a good place to start because it's one of the most fundamental, most ubiquitous, but most difficult questions people have. And if we can grapple with that, that can be sort of a key that unlocks a path to answering the rest of the questions. And I don't mean to say we'll have actual full concrete answers. I'm not saying I'm going to solve the problem of suffering. I'm going to give you ideally new, helpful ways to think about it. And it's not really me doing it, it's the literature. I'm just kind of a guide through the literature. So each lesson will have an overview. And so part 1 of this lesson, we're going to look at an introduction to the course. So just very basically, what do we do in this course? What are my expectations? So that you can have success, so that you know what to do on the assignments. Part 2 is more specific to the content of the course. So we're going to talk about this concept of catharsis that I just mentioned, which is the key to suffering and the key to understanding great literature, rather the key to working through the problem of suffering and the key to understanding great literature. But in part 2, I'll also get more specific into what the course is about. So before we get to catharsis at the very start of part 2, I'll go over kind of my plan for the course, what kind of literature we're going to study, and most importantly, why we're going to study this type of literature. Finally, in part 3, we'll have Suffering and Oedipus the King. So that's going to be our first literary text, our first narrative we're going to read. And most of the lectures will be 2 parts, and you'll have 2 readings, and you'll need to do a discussion board question for each reading. So in this lesson, it's the catharsis and then Oedipus the King. Usually it'll be like two literary texts. But the catharsis, like I said, is going to kind of give us a way in. And then usually there'll only be 2 parts. There's the extra part 1 this time to just give you an overview of the course since it's the first one. So let's get on with that overview, which again is just a really overview of how to succeed in this course and in online courses in general. So we'll start with the very general strategies for success with online learning, and then move more specifically to this particular course. I would say first and foremost, manage your time well. So online courses are typically set up for students who have other obligations, whether that's work, family, etc., which was my case when I was a student. I had a family, as I do now, and I worked a full-time job. So managing your time well. So the course is designed to give you time and flexibility to do the assignments in a manner that fits your schedule. So we have one major assignment due per week and not more than that, which means you can decide when throughout the week to do that assignment. But you have to do this strategically because there's a lot involved. There's reading, writing, etc. So you can't just do it all at once unless you have like a whole day or a lot of time set aside. So this first lesson will give you an idea of what the reading and writing workload will be like, and then you can plan based on your work schedule, your family schedule, etc. When you're going to work on the assignment each week, knowing that it's about the same workload each week. Come up with a schedule, point number 2, where you reserve time to work on the class throughout the week. So once you get a good gauge of how many hours it takes you to do each weekly assignment, you can then set up a time where you have those hours set aside, whether that is before or after your work schedule, on the weekends, the weekdays. That's up to you. That's the flexibility that comes with online learning, but you have to make sure you have that time set aside. You can't just hope to squeeze it in because, like I said, the workload is demanding. Stay up on due dates and reading assignments. Try to work ahead if possible. I'll have each lecture up at least a week before the assignments due, so you can work ahead if you want. That's not absolutely essential, but just keep in mind that, when the due dates are so that you don't miss anything. And if you ever do miss an assignment, be sure to email me right away so we can figure out how you can make that up. Now, more specifically for this class, read carefully, reread passages of the text that are confusing, read the footnotes, take notes as you read. We'll talk about this more as we go along, but these are what I call critical reading strategies. So when you read different types of things, you read at different paces. For example, I really like to read articles about NFL football on my phone when I'm waiting in line at the grocery store, things like that. I don't necessarily read at the same pace or with the same intentionality when I'm doing that as when I read the text for this class and I'm preparing lectures. So I can read an article about NFL football pretty quickly and get the meaning of it, get the message of it. The text for this class, I have to read much more slowly. There's often passages where my eyes kind of glaze over the page and I'm like, wait a second, what did I just read? I need to go back and reread that passage. A lot of the PDFs I'll be providing will have footnotes, so you can read those. They'll give you some clues to things that may have been different culturally, give you kind of that cultural context to help you understand some of the things. And lastly, most importantly, take notes as you read. As the third bullet point down there says, writing something down is much more helpful to remembering it than reading it, hearing it, or even seeing it is. So when you read, you can take notes in the margin, highlight words maybe you don't understand the meaning, look up what they mean, highlight words that seem important that are repeated, jot down things in the margins, observations you have. If you're reading slowly and rereading passages as you go, you can do this. One of my favorite tips that's helped me the most is when I get to like the end of a section, maybe a chapter or kind of a longer section, I try to, in 2 or 3 sentences, write down my summary of what happened there, because studies show that if you can take something and put the meaning of it into your own words, then you've really, truly, deeply understood it. So that would be my primary tip for the reading, which is a big part of this course. Secondly, watch the lectures carefully. You don't have to have the same degree of intentionality when watching the lectures, but still be similarly intentional. So take notes during them like you would if it were a lecture in a classroom. Pause them. I use a lot of questions. If we were meeting face to face, I really believe in the Socratic method, and so questions are the key to generating discussion. And so it's hard to have a discussion when you're watching a recorded lecture, but nonetheless, I'll be using questions as a way to activate your mind, to get you thinking critically. So I'll often say this, but even if I forget to say it, remember, pause the lecture, maybe jot down your answer, and then as you unpause the lecture, think about your answer in relation to what I say. Now, I'm not saying I have all the right answers. In a class like this, there's not necessarily usually right or wrong answers, only different kinds of answers, some better defended than others. So think about maybe the relationship, the connections, the similarities, the differences between what you thought, what I thought, and from there you can really start to develop some interesting thoughts about the text. So we've covered general strategies for online learning, specific strategies for the content of this class. Now here, we're getting very specific, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics. This is what you have to do each week. Do the reading assignment, watch the lecture. I say do the reading first, because the lecture I'm going to leave a lot of space for you to put forth your ideas on the discussion board, but I am going to analyze and give my take to a certain extent on the literature. And so you could reread it after the lecture if you have time. That'd be great. But try to read it first so that you get it, unfiltered by my perception of it first, and then watch the lecture to kind of see me elaborate on maybe what you've already thought. And then finally, do the discussion board assignment so you finish out the... So a question you probably have now is, what do I need to do on the discussion board? So again, these are kind of the nuts and bolts of the mechanics, but I'll try to also give you some rationale, some reason why here. So the discussion board is meant to replicate, if possible, kind of discussion we'd have in the classroom. So I'll pose some questions I feel are engaging that build on what we've already discussed in the lecture, but push you to take those ideas, those themes, a few steps further. So that's the rationale. Now the mechanics, 250 words, that's about 1 page in a Word document. So it's like a short, very short essay, so that you're engaging with each text in the lecture material each week in a manner reminiscent of how you would in the classroom. We'll usually, like I said, have 2 readings. This week we have the article on catharsis and Oedipus. So those are your 2 readings. Usually there'll be 2 lectures, 1 on each reading. And so for each lecture / reading or set of readings, you have to answer 1 question from a list, usually somewhere between 2 and 6 questions you can choose from. Just answer 1 from each list, so 2 total. And then respond to a classmate. When responding to a classmate, you need to advance the discussion in some way. So 150 words, much shorter, but you can't just say like, great post, I loved reading that. It's supposed to, like I said, try to replicate a classroom discussion. So something that advances the discussion. Think about if we were in, a brick and mortar, a physical classroom, face to face, and a student said something responding to a question I asked. How would you then respond to that student? If it were classroom, you wouldn't just say, great job. You'd maybe pose some kind of question yourself or say, that's really interesting. Have you thought about this? Or that makes me think of this. And so we want to advance the discussion. So 2 initial posts, 1 responding to each portion of the lecture, and then just 1 response to a classmate. You don't have to do 2 classmate responses. You can certainly do more if you want to keep the discussion going. These are minimums. So grading, class is worth 100 points total. Each of these lessons, there'll be 8 lessons, is worth 5 points. Then you've got 2 papers, 1 due at midterm, 1 at the end of the quarter, that are 30 points each. So each question that is a response to the reading / lecture is 2 points. Remember, there's 2 of those per discussion board post. And that's 2 points, so that if the question, you do a good job fully, you get the 2 points. And then if for some reason it's not quite all the way there, then you get 1 out of 2 points. And if you just didn't do it, you get a 0, obviously. And then the responses to classmates are 1 point, so it's 5 total points for each lecture. That way, the response to the content is the most important, so those are worth 2 points. And that way I can kind of give you feedback. If it's not quite all the way there, you can get half credit. The responses to classmates are more hit or miss. You either get the full point or not. So that's the grading for the discussion board post, the rationale why, how they work.